I can still remember the hum of the generator that night, the way it rattled like a tired old man coughing in the corner of our desert base. The air was thick with dust, a dry, metallic taste that clung to the back of my throat, and the glow of my laptop screen was the only softness in a world built from steel, sandbags, and shadows. I wasn't expecting anything special, just the usual short note from home. Miss you. Stay safe. Love you. Little lifelines of normalcy that made the endless days of patrols and heat bearable. Those words were supposed to tether me back to something more human than the war zone outside. But when I opened that night, it wasn't a lifeline. It was a blade. The subject line was sterile. Regarding our marriage, not hey babe or I miss you. Just 4 words that already felt like a verdict. I clicked it, my stomach tightening, though I didn't yet know why. The first line read like a business letter. I'm writing to let you know I've filed for divorce. That was it. No build-up, no apology, not even a hint of hesitation. Just cold, clinical language. My eyes darted to the bottom of the page, searching for something softer. A sorry, a please understand, but all I found was an attachment. I opened it. A bank statement. Our joint account. Drained. Every cent gone. I felt my chest cave in, as if someone had struck me with a butt of a rifle. The buzzing in my ears drowned out the hum of the generator. The faint laughter of a couple of guys playing cards at the next table. All I could hear was my pulse, ragged and uneven, like my body was trying to convince me I was still alive when my soul wasn't so sure. I reread the email. Once. Twice. 5 times. The words blurred, then sharpened again. File for divorce. Emptied the account. No explanations, no warmth, no memory of the vows we had whispered years ago under soft lights and trembling hands. I leaned back, the steel chair digging into my spine. My body armor hung from a nail just a few feet away, still streaked with sand and sweat. A reminder that out here, death was always one wrong step away. And yet, somehow, this email cut deeper than any bullet could have. A hand clapped my shoulder. Hey, man, you good? It was Ramirez, one of the younger guys. Always trying to joke, to keep spirits up. I swallowed hard, forcing air into lungs that didn't want to move. Yeah, I said, my voice barely holding. Just tired. He studied me for a second, like he knew there was more. But thankfully, he let it go, wandering back to the card game. I stared at the screen again, the cursor blinking at the end of her message like a heartbeat, mocking me, waiting for a reply I couldn't give. What was there to say? Thank you for dismantling my life by email. I reached for my wedding ring, twisting it around my finger the way I always did when I thought of her. It felt heavier than usual, as if it had absorbed the weight of betrayal in that one message. My hands trembled. I wanted to rip it off, fling it across the room, bury it in the sand outside where nothing ever grew. But instead, I pressed it to my lips, holding back the storm that threatened to tear me apart. The desert outside was still, but inside me a war had begun, a war I hadn't trained for. I closed the laptop slowly, almost ceremonially, as if shutting it might make the words disappear. But the truth had already burrowed into me. As I sat there in that dim, dust-filled room, surrounded by men who thought the enemy was out there beyond the wire, I realized mine was already inside my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my cot, staring at the canvas ceiling, counting the breaths until dawn. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, not the woman I married, but the stranger who wrote that email, a stranger who wore her name, her voice, her smile. By morning, one truth had crystallized. While I was fighting a war overseas, my real battle was waiting for me at home. When I think back to the beginning, it feels like a different lifetime, like remembering a dream after waking, where the colors are too bright and the edges too soft to be real. I met her on a rainy night in the city. I ducked into a small bookstore to escape the downpour, the kind of place where the floorboards groan with every step and the smell of old paper wrapped around you like a blanket. She was there, standing by the travel section, her umbrella dripping water onto the tiles. I remember the way her hair clung to her cheeks, damp from the storm, and how she laughed when she noticed me staring. That laugh, it was sharp and light, like glass chimes of wind. I didn't know then how much I would come to depend on it. We talked until the shop closed, wandering under her umbrella afterward, even though it barely covered us both. My shoulder was soaked, but I didn't care. It felt like the world had handed me something rare and precious, something I hadn't even realized I'd been waiting for. From there, everything happened quickly. Dinners that stretched into midnight walks. Notes left on my dashboard before I headed to base. A perfume bottle on my dresser, her scent lingering in my room long after she left. The little things that build a life before you even realize it's happening. When I proposed, I was 26 and full of conviction. She cried when I slipped the ring on her finger. Not just tears, she shook as if the weight of that moment pressed down on her chest. I told myself it was joy. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the beginning of something else, something I refused to see. Our wedding was small but perfect. My uniform pressed so stiff it felt like armor, her dress flowing like smoke. I can still hear the quiet catch in her voice when she promised forever. I believed her every word. To me, that gold band wasn't just jewelry. It was a shield, a circle without end. For a time, life was sweet. We moved into a cramped apartment near the base, the kind with peeling wallpaper and neighbors who argued too loudly. We didn't care. She filled the place with flowers, framed photos of us, candles that smelled of vanilla. I would come home after drills to find her curled on the couch, hair tied back, a book open on her lap. I'd kiss the top of her head, and she'd smile without looking up, as if my presence alone was enough. But the small cracks began almost imperceptibly. A distracted glance when I kissed her goodbye, the way she lingered on her phone at night, the glow of the screen lighting her face as she whispered, "Just a friend." Friends warned me. One guy from the unit, who'd seen too many military marriages rot from the inside, pulled me aside one day. Not everyone's built for it, man. Some women, they need more than letters and phone calls. I bristled, defensive. She wasn't some women. She was my wife. Even my parents, reserved as they were, dropped hints. My mother once said, while we were washing dishes, "She seems restless, like she's waiting for something." I laughed it off. She just misses me, that's all. The truth is, I didn't want to look too closely. I clung to the symbols, the ring on her finger, the scent of her perfume when I opened the closet, the framed photo of us at the wedding that sat on our nightstand. Symbols felt solid, proof that what we had was real, unbreakable. I gave everything I had to our marriage. Missed birthdays, missed anniversaries, missed holidays, sacrifices that came with the uniform. I wired my paychecks home, trusting her to build the life we dreamed while I was away. A house, kids someday, stability. But even dreams can rot if only one person tends them. I still remember the last day I saw her before deployment. We stood at the airport, the terminal buzzing around us with announcements and goodbyes. She hugged me, arms limp, her face buried in my chest. I told myself it was because she didn't want to let go, but when I pulled back, her eyes avoided mine, fixed instead on some distant point past my shoulder. "Take care of yourself," she said. "Not I'll miss you, not I love you. Just that." I kissed her forehead, told her I'd be back before she knew it. She smiled quick and tight, and turned away before I'd even reached the gate. At the time, I chalked it up to nerves, the strain of another long separation. But now, lying awake nights replaying every detail, I see it for what it was. She was already gone. The vows we had spoken, the promises etched in gold on our fingers, I thought they were ironclad. I thought love was a fortress. But what I didn't realize, what I refused to see, was that even fortresses can be abandoned from within. And looking back, all the signs were there. I just chose not to read them. There's a saying in the service, the desert doesn't just strip you of water, it strips you of illusions. Out there, under the unrelenting sun, there's nowhere to hide. Not from the enemy, not from yourself. In those weeks after her email, I learned just how true that was. I tried to keep my composure at first. To the guys around me, I was still Sergeant James, steady and reliable. I cracked the occasional joke. barked orders when I had to, played cards in the mess tent when the evenings stretched long. But beneath the mask, I was hollowed out. At night, when the bass quieted and the desert winds whispered against the canvas walls, I unraveled. I'd sit alone at the edge of my cot, laptop closed, but her words still etched in my mind, searing me with every repetition. I've filed for divorce. The account is empty. It was as though she'd reached across an ocean and ripped the floorboards from beneath me. Meals lost their taste. I picked at powdered eggs and dry bread, chewing but not swallowing, until my stomach clenched with hunger. My body moved through the routines, drills, patrols, debriefs, but my mind replayed our life like an old, broken reel. The wedding day, her laugh in the bookstore, that final hug at the airport, over and over, until the images felt more real than the sand under my boots. One night, unable to bear the silence, I pulled my ring off and held it up against the dim light of a lantern. The gold gleamed faintly, but instead of warmth, I felt its weight pressing into my palm. What once symbolized a circle without end now looked like a trap, a closed loop I couldn't escape. I almost hurled it into sand outside, imagined burying it beneath the dunes where no one would ever find it. But something inside me stopped my hand. Instead, I shoved it deep into my pocket. Not yet, I told myself. Not until I decide. It wasn't long before whispers found me. A mutual friend from back home, hesitant, apologetic, reached me through email. He'd seen her, my wife, my partner of years, on social media, smiling beside another man. Vacations, dinners, a shiny car with plates I knew had been paid for by my sweat. I remember staring at the grainy photo attached to that email. She looked radiant, carefree, and beside her, a man whose arm draped over her shoulders like he'd been there all along. My gut twisted, not just with betrayal but with humiliation. Everyone back home could see what I couldn't, that the woman I trusted with my future had traded me in like a worn-out coat. The humiliation ate at me more than hunger, more than heat. Out here, I was risking my life, sweating under 40 pounds of armor, while back home my name was a joke whispered over cocktails and hotel sheets. Then came the package, a thick envelope with government stamps, slid across the table by the mail officer with a muttered, "From the States." I opened it, expecting maybe a legal form, maybe something from my lawyer, but what spilled out were bank letters, cold and factual. Zero balance, overdrawn fees, notices of foreclosure. My house, our house, was weeks away from being repossessed. I gripped the papers, so tightly my hands shook. Every signature line, every black and white number, felt like a nail sealing the coffin of the life I thought I was building. She hadn't just taken my love. She'd taken my future, too. That night I collapsed. No mask, no bravado. Just me, alone in the dark, knees pulled to my chest like a child. My chest heaved with sobs I didn't know I was capable of, muffled into my hands so no one would hear. Out here, weakness was dangerous. But in that moment, I didn't care. I wanted the earth to swallow me whole. I thought about the ring again, pulled it from my pocket. I turned it over and over between my fingers, feeling its smoothness, its betrayal. Once it had been a promise. Now it was a chain. I pressed it into my palm until the edges dug into my skin. It hurt, but somehow that pain grounded me, reminded me I was still alive. For weeks, I carried that ring like a weight, in my pocket on patrol, against my chest when I slept. Some nights I hated it. Other nights, I clung to it, as though if I held on long enough, the life I'd lost might return. But gradually, something shifted. Beneath the despair, a flicker of something else stirred. Anger, yes, but also a strange kind of clarity. One dawn, as the sky bled purple and gold over the horizon, I found myself standing outside the wire, watching the sun rise over the endless dunes. The air was cold, sharp against my lungs. In that stillness, I realized something. She had taken my money. She had stolen my trust. She had humiliated me, stripped me down to nothing. But I was still here, breathing, standing, alive. The desert had stripped me of illusions, yes, but maybe, just maybe, it was clearing the ground for something else. I closed my fist around the ring, feeling its weight one last time. Not yet, I thought again. But soon, I would decide what to do with it. And in that moment, beneath the rising sun, a seed of resolve buried itself deep in me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the breaking point. When the deployment finally ended, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The flight home was quiet. Soldiers beside me leaned against the rattling windows, some snoring, some staring blankly ahead. A few joked about the first meal they'd have back home: burgers, cold beer, warm beds. I smiled faintly, but my heart was heavy. For me, there would be no warm bed waiting, no arms wrapping around me at the arrival's gate, only a void. When the wheels touched U.S. soil, cheers erupted. Men and women kissed the ground, called loved ones on borrowed phones, laughed with relief. I stepped off the plane and into the cool night air, and all I felt was a silence pressing in. My phone, when I turned it on, buzzed only with reminders, overdue bills, bank warnings. Not a single message from her. The drive to the house was surreal. Every street, every lamppost, felt both familiar and foreign. I gripped the steering wheel of the rental, like it was the only thing keeping me tethered. My heart pounded as I turned into our neighborhood, the trees we'd once walked beneath, hand in hand, the mailbox we painted together one spring, ghosts of a life that no longer belonged to me. And then I saw it, the house, my house. The blinds were drawn, the yard overgrown, a foreclosure notice flapped against the front door, paper curling from rain and wind. My chest tightened. It was one thing to read about it overseas, another to stand in front of the ruin with my own eyes. I unlocked the door with a key that still fit, though the place already felt like it belonged to someone else. Inside, the air was stale. Rooms were stripped bare, furniture gone, photos ripped from the walls. Only the indentations in the carpet where the couch once stood, the faint outline of a picture frame on the wall, hinted at the life we had built. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet and found one lone mug, chipped at the rim. I recognized it instantly, a gift from my brother years ago. Every other dish, every pot and pan, gone. She'd taken not just the valuables, but the ordinary things too, the tools of daily life, even the curtains. I walked room to room, silence following me like a shadow. Our bedroom was the worst. The closet, once bursting with her dresses and my uniforms, stood empty. The bed frame was bare, only the mattress left behind, stained and sagging in the middle. On the nightstand, I noticed a faint ring-shaped mark from where her perfume bottle once sat. My throat tightened. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, the springs creaking beneath me. From my pocket, I pulled out the wedding ring I had carried through the desert. It gleamed dully in the muted light. I placed it on the nightstand, right over that faint circle of perfume, and stared at it. A ring upon a ring, a symbol of what had been taken and what remained. The days that followed blurred together. I stayed in the house for as long as I could before the bank forced me out. Nights were the hardest. Without the desert winds or the hum of generators, the silence felt suffocating. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of absence. To eat, I relied on takeout and gas station sandwiches. Most nights, the food sat untouched. My stomach churned too much to accept it. I lost weight. My uniform, once snug, now hung loosely on me. I stopped answering calls from friends. I didn't know how to explain the depth of my failure. How do you tell someone you lost not just your wife, but your home, your savings, your dignity? One evening, desperate to escape the silence, I drove. No destination in mind, just the road stretching endlessly ahead. The hum of the tires on asphalt became a kind of meditation. Towns blurred past, neon signs flickering against the dark windows. Eventually, I pulled into a rest stop and sat there, engine off, staring into the night. I thought about ending it, about how easy it would be to disappear, to let the silence swallow me for good. But then I felt it, the ring in my pocket, pressing against my thigh. I pulled it out, turning it in my hand. Even in the dim glow of the dashboard, it caught the light, and I thought, if I'm still carrying this, then maybe I'm not done yet. That thought carried me through the darkest nights. I began to drift, from one cheap motel to another, from diner counters to libraries where I could sit unnoticed. I carried a backpack with a few clothes, a razor, the chipped mug, and the ring. My life reduced to essentials, stripped bare like the house. Yet somewhere in that stripped-down existence, something began to shift. The silence that once suffocated me started to feel cleansing. For the first time in years, no one demanded anything of me. No orders. No expectations. No manipulation disguised as love. One morning, in a small town off a forgotten highway, I found myself sitting in a diner with a steaming cup of coffee. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes but a kind smile, asked where I was headed. I shrugged. Nowhere, I admitted. She poured more coffee and said softly, "Sometimes nowhere is exactly where you need to be." Her words lingered. Days turned into weeks. The road became my companion, the silence my teacher. I began to write in a battered notebook, fragments of memory, questions I never dared ask myself, pieces of who I was before I became someone else's shadow. I still carried the ring. Some nights, I held it in my palm and felt the weight of everything I had lost. Other nights, I left it on the nightstand of a motel, daring myself to walk away from it. But I always picked it up again, not out of longing, but out of something else, a reminder of what betrayal could do and of what I had survived. Gradually, I noticed small changes. My appetite returned. Food began to taste again. I started running in the mornings, lungs burning, sweat stinging my eyes, each step pounding out the rage and grief. The world, once gray, began to show hints of color. And with every mile I put between myself and the ruins of my old life, I began to understand. Survival wasn't about holding on to what was lost. It was about creating space for something new to take root. The silence, once a storm's aftermath, had become fertile ground. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But for the first time, I believed healing was possible. And deep inside, I felt the stirrings of something else, a strength I had forgotten I possessed. The storm had taken everything, but it had also cleared the path. And I was ready at last to walk it. There comes a point when grief burns itself out. Not all at once. Not like a fire that dies in night, but like embers slowly cooling, until only ash remains. For months, I had been living in borrowed rooms, nursing coffee in diners, scribbling fragments in a battered notebook. I thought survival was enough. But one morning, as I stared at my reflection in the streaked mirror of yet another cheap motel, I hardly recognized the man before me. Hollow cheeks, haunted eyes, a shadow of a beard I hadn't cared to trim. I touched the ring on the nightstand. Always the ring, always waiting. And I realized that if I didn't change, I would become nothing more than that ring, a symbol of what was lost, frozen in time, never moving forward. That thought jolted me. I started small. At dawn, I ran. The first few days, my lungs screamed and my knees buckled, but I kept going. The pavement became my confessional. Each footfall pounded out anger, shame, regret. Soon, I wasn't just running from my past. I was running toward something. I didn't yet know what, but it was forward, and that was enough. I found work at a repair shop run by an old army buddy, Mark. He took one look at me, gaunt, restless, and didn't ask questions. He simply handed me a set of greasy coveralls and said, "Get to it." The work was humble, honest. Engines don't lie. They break, you fix them. Unlike people, machines don't betray. My hands grew callous, my clothes perpetually stained with oil, but for the first time in months, I felt useful. Every bolt tightened. Every engine roared back to life, reminded me that broken things could be made whole again. Maybe I could, too. The paycheck wasn't much, but it was mine. No shared account to be emptied. No one waiting to drain me. I opened a new bank account, just my name on the card this time, and promised myself I would guard it like a fortress. Each deposit, no matter how small, felt like a stone laid in the foundation of a new life. At night, I studied. Finance, budgeting, investing. Things I once trusted her to handle while I was deployed. I filled the margins of my notebook with equations and quotes, teaching myself discipline, not just a body, but a mind. I refused to be naive again. She had taken my money once, but she would never take my power over it again. Symbols began to shift. The ring, once heavy in my pocket, I placed in a drawer. Not discarded, not forgotten, but contained. I no longer needed to carry it everywhere. It was no longer my shackle, just a relic, like an old medal, a reminder of battles fought. In its place, I bought a watch. Nothing extravagant, just a sturdy timepiece with a leather band. But every time I buckled it on, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The ring had bound me to a promise broken. The watch reminded me that my time, my life, was mine again. I moved from the motel into a small apartment above the repair shop. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, but it was mine. No foreclosure notices taped to the door, no shared keys. Each evening, when I turned the lock, I felt a flicker of peace. The silence that once tormented me now became companionable. I cooked simple meals, eggs, rice, beans, and ate them at a wobbly kitchen table, grateful simply to taste food again. I even bought a new mug, sturdy and blue, to replace the chipped one I had carried like a wound. Small things, but they mattered. They were seeds. It wasn't all upward climb. Grief is a stubborn guest. Some nights, I still lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she was doing, if she ever thought of me. On those nights, the urge to reach for the ring tugged at me. Sometimes I gave in, holding it between my fingers, cold and indifferent. But gradually, those nights grew fewer. One day, word reached me through a mutual acquaintance. She was no longer with the man she had left me for. He had abandoned her, just as easily as she had abandoned me. She was struggling, her once flashy lifestyle unraveling. For a moment, I felt a bitter flicker of satisfaction. But then it ebbed, replaced by something deeper. Clarity. Her downfall was none of my doing. I didn't need to lift a hand for justice to arrive. Life had its own way of balancing the scales. She reached out once. A short message, not even apology, just convenience. Maybe we can talk. I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. The old me would have replied, desperate for closure, for answers. The new me simply deleted the message. Growth wasn't just survival anymore. It was transformation. At the shop, Mark eventually offered me a partnership. You've got the head for this, he said. And the guts. I could use someone like you. I hesitated at first. Partnership meant risk, investment, vulnerability. But I had studied, prepared, built savings of my own. I shook his hand and said, let's do it. The business grew. Customers trusted me. They saw the discipline in my eyes, the steadiness in my hands. And slowly, I built not just a career, but a reputation. Months turned into years. I moved from the cramped apartment into a modest home of my own. Nothing extravagant, but warm, with sunlight streaming through clean windows. On the mantel, I placed my watch when I came home each evening, a ritual that reminded me time was mine to use, not waste. I kept the ring in the drawer, tucked away. Sometimes, when cleaning, I'd stumble upon it. I no longer felt the sting. Instead, it was like finding an old scar, a reminder pain survived, not pain still bleeding. One autumn evening, as I sat on the porch of my new home, a cup of coffee steaming in the cool air, I thought about everything she had taken. My money, my trust, my home, my heart. But she hadn't taken me. I was stronger, sharper, more alive than I had ever been in her shadow. Revenge, I realized, didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, revenge was simply living well, thriving, becoming the man they never believed you could become. And I had done that. Still, a core remained unfinished. I knew one day, fate would bring her back into my orbit. And when that day came, I would be ready. Not to fight, not to rage, but to face her as the man I had rebuilt from the ruins. That was the power shift. Not vengeance, not cruelty, but freedom. I was no longer defined by betrayal. I was defined by survival, by growth, by the quiet strength of man who walked through the desert of betrayal and emerged, scarred but unbroken, the man I was always meant to become. Some reckonings don't arrive with thunder. They slip in quietly, like dusk settling over a familiar street. Mine came on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The letter had arrived weeks earlier. Final proceedings for property division. I'd ignore her attempt at contact, but this was unavoidable. As I dressed that morning, I paused at the drawer. The ring lay there, dull in the half-light. I picked it up, turned it between my fingers. Once, it had burned in my palm like a brand. Now it was just metal, cold and silent. I slipped it into my pocket, not as a weight, but as a choice. I knew today would be the last time I ever carried it. On my wrist, the watch ticked steadily, a heartbeat of my new life. I tightened the strap, a quiet reminder. My time was mine. The courthouse was half empty. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Papers shuffled, voices murmured. And then she walked in. For a moment, time folded back on itself. I saw her as I had years ago. Rain in her hair, perfume in the air, vows trembling on her lips. But the illusion shattered quickly. She looked older, not in years, but in weight. Lines carved deeper around her eyes. Shoulders slumped with something heavier than age. The fire she once carried, the arrogance of someone who believed the world would bend for her, was gone. In its place was a brittle fragility, like glass that had already cracked. Our eyes met. Hers darted away first. We sat across from one another. Paper spread between us like a battlefield. Lawyers murmured, pen scratched. Clerks moved in and out. But beneath all of it was a silence that hummed louder than any noise. At one point, she tried to speak directly to me. "You look different," she said softly, almost hesitant. I nodded once. "I am." She studied me, as if trying to reconcile the man before her with the man she had once left behind. I offered nothing. No anger. No pleading. Just stillness. The proceedings dragged on. Numbers, signatures, divisions of property that hardly mattered anymore. She made a half-hearted attempt to argue for more, but even her lawyer seemed unconvinced. My records were clean, my finances steady, my arguments precise. I had come prepared, not to fight, but to finish. When the session ended, papers signed and stamped, she lingered. Her lawyer packed up quickly, leaving us in the echo of the emptying room. Finally, she spoke. I never meant for it to end this way. The old me would have seized on that, demanded answers, explanations, apologies. But I was no longer that man. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the ring, and placed it gently on the table between us. Her breath caught. She stared at it, then at me. "That was forever," I said quietly. At least that's what I believed. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The silence between us was heavy, but not unbearable. For the first time, it was just silence, not a wound, not a plea. I stood, collected my watch, my papers. "Goodbye," I said, final as a closing door, and I walked out, leaving the ring behind. The sunlight outside was sharp, almost blinding after the dim courthouse. I breathed it in deep and steady, as if filling my lungs with new air. I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I thought about that day often. Not her face, not her words, but the ring on the table. For years, it had been my anchor, my prison. That day, it became something else, not a symbol of loss, but of release. At home, I placed the court papers in a drawer alongside my notebook filled with years of scribbled pain and lessons learned. The watch still sat on the mantel each night, ticking steady, faithful. The blue mug waited in the kitchen cabinet, warm with morning coffee. These were my symbols now, of survival, of choice, of a life reclaimed. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, I sat on my porch and thought about closure. People imagine it as a grand moment. Fireworks, vengeance, an apology that makes everything right. But closure is quieter than that. It's the sound of your own footsteps, leaving a place you no longer belong. It's the stillness in your chest when you realize the war is over. She had taken so much from me, my money, my trust, the years I can never reclaim. But she hadn't taken my future. She hadn't taken me. I had walked to the desert betrayal, survived the silence after the storm, and emerged not with rage, but with peace. And that, in the end, was the truest justice. The next morning, I woke early, brewed coffee in my blue mug, strapped on my watch, and stepped out into the new day. The past was behind me. The future was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt entirely unshakably free.